The whistle of the train pierced the dry Arizona air as Beatrice Bailey stood alone on the wooden platform of Oro Blanco station, her trunk at her feet and tears streaming down her face. The year was 1885, and the man she had traveled 1,000 miles to marry had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note saying he had found another. The distant mountains shimmered in the heat as she contemplated her uncertain future, stranded in a town where she knew no one and had nowhere to go. "Miss, you look like you could use some help," came a deep voice from behind her. Beatrice turned to find a tall man with kind eyes, a weathered face, and the unmistakable appearance of a cowboy from his worn boots to the hat he respectfully removed as he addressed her. "He left me at the station," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper, the devastation in her tone telling the whole story. The cowboy's expression softened. "Then I'll meet you on every train after," he replied, offering a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Until you find what you're looking for, or perhaps something better. My name is Flynn Dawson, ranch foreman at the Copper Ridge Spread, and I promise you won't be alone in Oro Blanco." Beatrice wiped her tears, studying the stranger's face for any sign of deception. Finding none, she extended her gloved hand. "Beatrice Bailey, I came to marry a man who apparently couldn't be bothered to wait." The abandoned bride had no way of knowing that Flynn Dawson's impulsive offer of help would change both their lives forever, or that the scorching Arizona territory held both dangers and a chance at a love far truer than the one she had lost. "Let me help you with your trunk, Miss Bailey," Flynn said, lifting the heavy luggage with ease. "First, we'll find you proper lodging. Then, if you'll allow it, I'd like to introduce you to some good people who might help you get settled." As they walked away from the station, Beatrice cast one last glance at the train pulling away, billowing steam into the azure sky. The man she had traveled so far to meet was truly gone, but something in Flynn Dawson's steady gaze told her that perhaps this unexpected detour might lead somewhere worth going after all. Oro Blanco was nothing like the bustling Pennsylvania town Beatrice had left behind. A single dusty main street lined with wooden buildings stretched before her, the desert landscape vast and unfamiliar beyond. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Beatrice was suddenly aware of how impractical her traveling clothes were for this climate. "The Copper Kettle boarding house is just down the street," Flynn explained as they walked. "Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable establishment. She'll look after you properly." "I don't know how long I can afford to stay," Beatrice admitted. "I spent nearly everything I had on the train ticket." Flynn nodded thoughtfully. "Oro Blanco may be small, but we're growing. The mines brought prosperity. A woman of education could find employment here." "I was a school teacher back home," Beatrice said. The words felt strange. Home was no longer home. She had sold everything, said all her goodbyes, burned all her bridges to come west and marry Harold Weber, the man who had courted her through letters for nearly a year after responding to her advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. "We're in desperate need of a teacher," Flynn replied, his expression brightening. "The children here have had nothing but occasional lessons from whoever could spare the time." The boarding house appeared ahead, a two-story white building with green shutters and a small but well-tended garden that seemed miraculous in the desert setting. Flynn carried her trunk up the steps and held the door for her. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a plump, no-nonsense widow with shrewd eyes that assessed Beatrice immediately. After hearing a simplified version of Beatrice's situation, she clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Harold Weber, you say? That snake left town 3 weeks ago after losing heavily at cards." Rumor has it he fled to California with a saloon girl. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. You're better off without him, dear. Any man who'd leave a lady stranded is no gentleman at all. Beatrice felt both validated and mortified. I had no idea. We corresponded for nearly a year. Some men can write pretty words they don't mean, Mrs. Henderson said, patting Beatrice's hand. Now, about your stay. I can advance Miss Bailey 2 weeks' board, Flynn interjected. On the condition you speak with Mayor Richards tomorrow about the teaching position. That's not necessary, Beatrice protested, though she had only a few dollars remaining in her reticule. Consider it an investment in Oro Blanco's future, Flynn insisted. Besides, I promised I'd help, and a cowboy keeps his word. That evening, after washing away the dust of travel and changing into her one remaining clean dress, Beatrice sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, contemplating the dramatic turn her life had taken. The other boarders, an elderly mining engineer and a young clerk from the assay office, had been welcoming, but she still felt adrift in a sea of uncertainty. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson answered it, then appeared in the parlor doorway. Miss Bailey, Mr. Dawson is here. Says he brought something that might interest you. Flynn stood in the entryway, hat in hand. He'd clearly cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt beneath his vest. In his other hand he held several books. I remembered you mentioned being a teacher, he explained. These belong to my late mother. I thought you might enjoy them, and they might help you prepare for your meeting with the mayor. Beatrice accepted the books, worn copies of McGuffey's Readers, an arithmetic primer, and a surprisingly well-preserved volume of Shakespeare's works. This is incredibly thoughtful, Mr. Dawson. I'll take excellent care of them. Keep them as long as you need, he said. And please call me Flynn. Then you must call me Beatrice. She found herself smiling genuinely for the first time that day. Would you care to sit for a while? I'd like to learn more about Oro Blanco and its educational needs. Flynn stayed for nearly an hour, describing the town, the surrounding ranches, and the approximately 20 school-age children who had no formal education. Beatrice took mental notes, already planning lessons and considering how to group students of different ages. Why do you care so much about the school? She asked suddenly. Most cowboys I've heard of aren't particularly concerned with education. Flynn's expression turned thoughtful. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me to value learning. And I've seen what happens to communities without education. They either stagnate or become lawless. Oro Blanco deserves better. When Flynn finally took his leave, promising to return in the morning to escort her to the mayor's office, Beatrice found herself watching his retreating figure from the window. There was something compelling about this cowboy with his unexpected depth and kindness. He's a good man, that Flynn Dawson, Mrs. Henderson commented, startling Beatrice. Respected by everyone, though he keeps to himself mostly. Lost his parents young and worked his way up from ranch hand to foreman through sheer determination. He's been very kind to a complete stranger, Beatrice acknowledged. That's his nature, the older woman replied. Just don't mistake kindness for anything else. Flynn Dawson hasn't shown interest in any woman since Sarah Wilkins died of fever 3 years ago. They were to be married that spring. The information sobered Beatrice. Of course, a man like Flynn would have a past, possibly a broken heart. His kindness toward her was clearly nothing more than decency to a woman in distress. She would be wise to remember that. The next morning, Flynn arrived promptly at 9, mounted on a chestnut gelding and leading a gentle-looking bay mare. I thought you might prefer riding to walking in this heat, he explained, helping her mount. This is Penny. She belongs to the ranch owner's wife, but she rarely rides anymore. The mayor's office was at the far end of town, and as they rode, Flynn pointed out the various businesses and introduced Beatrice to townspeople they passed. Everyone seemed to respect him, and several expressed enthusiasm upon learning she might become their teacher. Mayor Richards proved to be a portly, enthusiastic man with grand visions for Oro Blanco's future. He hired Beatrice on the spot, offering a modest salary plus living quarters in a small room behind the schoolhouse. "It's not much," the mayor admitted, "but it's private and clean." The ladies' auxiliary furnished it last year, hoping to attract a teacher. "When can I start?" Beatrice asked, eager to begin earning her way. "We can hold a town meeting tomorrow to introduce you and perhaps begin classes next Monday. That would give you time to settle in and prepare." As they left the mayor's office, Beatrice couldn't contain her excitement. "I can't believe how perfectly this has worked out, from complete disaster to a new position in less than a day." Flynn smiled. "Oro Blanco needed a teacher. You needed a fresh start. Sometimes fate works that way." "And sometimes fate has help from kind strangers," she replied, impulsively touching his arm. "Thank you, Flynn. I don't know what I would have done without your assistance." A shadow crossed his face so quickly Beatrice almost missed it. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said quietly. "Not anyone. Most would have walked past a crying woman at a train station." That afternoon, Flynn helped Beatrice move her few belongings from the boarding house to the schoolroom. The space was simple, a single room with rows of rough-hewn benches, a teacher's desk on a small platform, and a blackboard mounted on the wall. A door at the back led to her new living quarters. One room with a narrow bed, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove for cooking and heating. "It's perfect," Beatrice declared, though it was far humbler than her previous accommodations in Pennsylvania. "The pump is just outside, and there's an outhouse behind the building," Flynn explained. "For bathing, most ladies use the bathhouse on Saturdays. Mrs. Henderson can show you." After arranging her belongings, Beatrice sat at the teacher's desk, imagining the room filled with children. Flynn leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Surely you have work to attend to at your ranch." "The Copper Ridge can spare me for one more day," he replied. "Tomorrow I thought I might show you a bit of the countryside if you're interested. There's a spot overlooking the valley that's worth seeing." Beatrice hesitated. She barely knew this man, despite his kindness, and yet the prospect of spending another day in his company was undeniably appealing. "I would enjoy that," she finally said, "but I wouldn't want to impose further on your time." "It's no imposition," Flynn assured her. "Consider it a proper welcome to Arizona territory." The following morning brought clear skies and marginally cooler temperatures. Flynn arrived with 2 horses, a basket secured to his saddle. "Mrs. Henderson packed us a lunch," he explained. "The ride is about an hour each way." As they rode out of town, the landscape opened before them, vast, rugged, and startlingly beautiful in its harsh way. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, and in the distance, mountains rose purple against the sky. "It's so different from Pennsylvania," Beatrice observed. "There, everything is green and close. Here you can see forever." "That's what I love about it," Flynn replied. "The openness, the endless sky. Makes a man feel free." They rode at a leisurely pace, Flynn pointing out landmarks and native plants, explaining which were useful for medicine or food. Beatrice listened, fascinated by his knowledge and the easy way he shared it. "How did you learn all this?" she asked. "From an old Apache man who worked at the ranch when I first came here. He took a liking to me, taught me the land's secrets. Said a man who understands the desert will never starve or die of thirst." Around midday, They reached Flynn's destination, a flat outcropping of rock overlooking a sweeping valley. Below, a ribbon of green marked a creek's path through the desert, and in the far distance, the silhouette of Oro Blanco was just visible. "This is breathtaking," Beatrice exclaimed as Flynn helped her down from the saddle. "I come here to think sometimes," he admitted, spreading a blanket in a shaded spot. "Not many people know about it." They shared Mrs. Henderson's lunch, fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts while talking easily about books, their childhoods, and their dreams. Beatrice found herself sharing things she'd rarely told anyone: her parents' death from influenza when she was 18, her struggle to support herself as a teacher in a town that valued her less with each passing year, her decision to answer a matrimonial advertisement out of loneliness and a desire for family. Flynn, in turn, spoke of losing his parents in a ranch accident at 16, working his way west from Texas, finding a home at Copper Ridge, and his ambitions to someday own land of his own. "And there was someone special once?" Beatrice asked softly, remembering Mrs. Henderson's comments. Flynn's expression tightened. "Sarah. We grew up together back in Texas. She followed me here 3 years ago, but there was a fever that winter." He looked away. "We were to be married that spring." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said, touching his hand briefly. "Life goes on," Flynn replied, his voice rough. "What about you? Beyond this Harold who wasn't worth your time, was there someone before?" Beatrice shook her head. "Teaching doesn't leave much room for courting, especially when you live with the school board president's family, as I did." Harold's letters were the most romance I'd experienced. Flynn's eyebrows rose. "Those must have been some letters to bring you all the way to Arizona." "They were beautiful," Beatrice admitted, embarrassed now at her naivety. "Full of poetry and promises. I thought they revealed his soul." "Clearly I was mistaken. Some men can write pretty words," Flynn said, echoing Mrs. Henderson's sentiment. "But words mean nothing without actions behind them." As they packed up to return to town, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. "We should hurry," Flynn said, helping Beatrice mount. "Summer storms come fast here." They rode quickly, but the storm moved faster. When they were still 30 minutes from town, the sky opened, rain pouring down in sheets. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by booming thunder that spooked the horses. "There's a line shack just ahead," Flynn shouted over the storm. "We can wait it out there." The small wooden structure appeared through the rain, a basic shelter used by cowboys working the range. Inside was spare but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Flynn quickly got a fire going while Beatrice wrung water from her hair and skirts. Outside, the storm raged, rain hammering against the roof. "These summer storms usually pass quickly," Flynn assured her, removing his soaked vest and hanging it near the fire. "We should be able to head back within the hour." Beatrice nodded, suddenly aware of how improper their situation was, alone in this isolated cabin, both of them wet and bedraggled. Flynn seemed to realize it too, keeping a respectful distance as they dried themselves by the fire. "I'm sorry about this," he said stiffly. "It's not what I intended." "I know that," Beatrice replied. "You've been nothing but a gentleman." They sat in awkward silence as the fire crackled, the only other sound the drumming of rain on the roof. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "Tell me about your ranch. The one you hope to have someday." Flynn's expression softened, and he described his dream: a modest spread with good water and grass, a comfortable house, horses of his own breeding. As he spoke, his passion was evident, and Beatrice found herself imagining such a life. It would be challenging but rewarding, far from the confined existence she'd known. The rain began to ease, and Flynn checked the horses, which were sheltered under a lean-to behind the cabin. When he returned, he announced they could safely return to town. The ride back was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. When they reached the schoolhouse, Flynn helped Beatrice down from the saddle, their eyes meeting for a long moment before he stepped back. "The town meeting is at 7, he reminded her. "I'll come by to escort you if you'd like." "I would like that very much," Beatrice replied. That evening, the town hall was packed with curious residents eager to meet their new teacher. Mayor Richards introduced Beatrice proudly, and she spoke briefly about her background and plans for the school. The response was enthusiastic, with parents immediately enrolling children and offering to help prepare the schoolroom. Throughout the meeting, Beatrice was aware of Flynn standing at the back of the room, his steady gaze a reassuring presence. When formal proceedings ended and people gathered for refreshments, he approached with a cup of punch. "You impress them," he said, handing her the drink. "Even old Mr. Gunderson, and he's skeptical of anything new." "I hope I can live up to their expectations," Beatrice replied. "Some of the older boys haven't had any schooling at all." "You'll manage," Flynn said confidently. "You have that look about you, determined." As the evening wound down, Flynn walked Beatrice back to the schoolhouse. The air was still damp from the earlier storm, but stars had appeared, brilliant in the clear desert sky. "Thank you for everything these past 2 days," Beatrice said as they reached her door. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Seeing you settled is payment enough," Flynn replied. "Besides, I enjoyed the company. It's been a while since I've had someone interesting to talk with." He hesitated, then continued. "I'll be busy at the ranch for the next few weeks. Roundup season keeps us working dawn to dusk. But perhaps when you're settled with your teaching, I could call on you properly. Maybe Sunday dinner at the hotel." Beatrice felt a flutter of anticipation. "I'd like that very much." Flynn tipped his hat. "Until then, Miss Bailey. Until then, Mr. Dawson." The following Monday, Beatrice welcomed 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The challenges were immediate varying levels of knowledge, limited supplies, and the natural resistance of children testing a new authority. But Beatrice thrived on the work, quickly establishing routines and earning respect through firm but fair teaching. True to his word, Flynn didn't appear during those first busy weeks. Beatrice occasionally heard his name mentioned. The Copper Ridge hands were working the North Range. Someone had seen Flynn in town briefly for supplies. The ranch owner was considering making him partner. She told herself the disappointed pang she felt at his absence was merely the natural reaction to losing her first friend in Oro Blanco. 3 Sundays after the town meeting, Beatrice was grading arithmetic exercises when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Flynn standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat nervous. "Miss Bailey," he greeted her formally, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, stepping back to invite him in. "Roundup finished yesterday." He remained standing just inside the door. "I wondered if that dinner invitation might still interest you." Beatrice smiled. "It would. Let me get my shawl." The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Oro Blanco, with white tablecloths and a proper menu. Several townspeople nodded greetings as they entered, and Beatrice noticed a few curious looks. She realized that being seen dining with Flynn Dawson made a statement in this small community. "How's the teaching going?" Flynn asked after they ordered. "Wonderfully challenging," Beatrice replied enthusiastically. "The children are bright if a bit behind, and the parents have been supportive. We've received donations of books, slates, even a globe. And you're comfortable, getting everything you need." "Yes, though I'm still adjusting to desert living. Mrs. Henderson has been teaching me to conserve water and avoid scorpions." Flynn chuckled. Essential skills out here. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed easily. Flynn told amusing stories about roundup adventures, while Beatrice shared anecdotes about her students. It felt remarkably comfortable, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few weeks. After dinner, they walked through town in the cool evening air. Without discussion, their steps led them to the train station where they'd first met. They sat on a bench, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about what you said that first day," Flynn said suddenly. "About being left at the station." Beatrice glanced at him, surprised. "What about it?" "I made you a promise, that I'd meet you on every train after." He turned to face her directly. "I meant it, Beatrice, not just as a kind gesture to a stranger, but as a promise I intend to keep, if you'll allow it." Her heart quickened. "What exactly are you saying, Flynn?" "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly. I know we've only known each other a short while, but there's something about you, something I haven't felt since," he broke off. "Something I didn't think I'd feel again." Beatrice reached for his hand. "I feel it too, this connection between us." "I want to do this right," Flynn continued. "Sunday dinners, church together, picnics when the weather permits, getting to know each other at a proper pace." "I would like that very much," Beatrice replied, her voice soft in the growing darkness. Flynn's courtship was as steady and reliable as the man himself. Each Sunday, he appeared at her door for church and dinner afterward. Sometimes they joined other townspeople. Other times, they enjoyed private meals at the hotel. On pleasant afternoons, they rode together in the countryside, Flynn teaching Beatrice about the land she now called home. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, their attachment deepened. Flynn began stopping by the schoolhouse when in town on ranch business, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered along the trail, once a beautiful handkerchief purchased from a traveling peddler. The town watched their courtship with approval. Beatrice had proven herself a dedicated teacher, while Flynn was already respected throughout the territory. Mrs. Henderson, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Beatrice, expressed her satisfaction directly. "That young man looks at you the way a man should look at a woman he cherishes," she declared one Saturday when Beatrice visited for tea. "And you've brought light back to his eyes. After Sarah died, I worried he'd never open his heart again." "He's still cautious," Beatrice admitted. "We both are. But each day, it becomes easier to imagine a future together." That future seemed to crystallize on a crisp November evening when Flynn invited Beatrice for a special dinner at the hotel. He'd been unusually quiet that day, and Beatrice sensed something important was coming. After their meal, Flynn suggested a walk. The air was chilly, and Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter as they strolled toward the edge of town. To her surprise, Flynn led her to a small plot of land where the foundation of a house was taking shape. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "My future," Flynn replied, his voice steady but threaded with nervousness. "The owner of Copper Ridge made me partner last month, as you know. Part of my compensation was this acre of land at the town's edge." "You're building a house," Beatrice realized. "I'm building a home," Flynn corrected gently. "Or hoping to." He took her hands in his. "Beatrice Bailey, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and purpose back to me when I thought those feelings were gone forever." Beatrice's heart raced as Flynn continued. "I know it hasn't been long, but some things don't need time to be certain. I love you, Beatrice. I want to build this home with you, fill it with children and laughter and books. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Flynn Dawson, I will marry you." He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and reverence. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "I have something for you," Flynn said, reaching into his pocket and producing a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's. I've been carrying it since I decided to ask you." He slipped it onto her finger, a perfect fit. "She would have loved you," he added softly. "As I would have loved her, for raising such a good man," Beatrice replied. They announced their engagement at church the following Sunday, to the delight of the congregation. The town immediately began planning the celebration, with the wedding set for Christmas Eve, a time when ranch work was slower, and the schoolhouse would be closed for the holiday. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparation. The house progressed rapidly, with neighbors helping Flynn raise walls and set the roof. Beatrice, with Mrs. Henderson's guidance, began assembling household items and sewing linens. The ladies of the town hosted a quilting bee, creating a wedding quilt with squares contributed by each family. A week before the wedding, tragedy nearly struck. Flynn was working late at the house, hoping to finish the bedroom before the ceremony, when a lantern overturned. The fire spread quickly, and though Flynn managed to extinguish it before the structure was destroyed, he suffered burns to his hands and arms. Beatrice was summoned to the doctor's home, where she found Flynn sedated, his burns bandaged. Dr. Wilson was reassuring but firm. "He'll recover fully, but he needs rest. Those hands won't be doing any building for at least a month." "The house," Flynn mumbled, trying to sit up. "Have to finish." "Lie still," Beatrice ordered, gently pressing him back. "The house can wait." "The wedding," Flynn protested. "I wanted everything perfect for you." "All I need for a perfect wedding is you, Flynn Dawson," Beatrice said firmly. "We'll marry in the church as planned and stay at the boarding house until the house is ready. Mrs. Henderson already offered her best room." The town rallied around them. Men volunteered to continue work on the house, ensuring it would be weathertight before winter storms arrived. The women adjusted wedding plans, with Mrs. Henderson insisting the couple stay at her boarding house as long as needed. By Christmas Eve, Flynn's burns were healing well, though his hands remained bandaged. He stood proudly at the altar as Beatrice walked down the aisle in a cream-colored gown sewn by the town's dressmaker, holding a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, filling the air with a festive scent. Every resident of Oro Blanco seemed to be present, along with ranchers from miles around. Even Harold Weber's abandonment now seemed a blessing, leading Beatrice to this moment and this man. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice ringing through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When it came time for the rings, Flynn had arranged a surprise. Unable to place the ring himself due to his bandaged hands, he nodded to a young boy, Tommy Williams, Beatrice's star pupil, who stepped forward with the gold band. "Miss Bailey taught me to read," Tommy announced proudly. "Mr. Dawson asked me to help him today on account of his hands." The congregation chuckled warmly as Tommy carefully placed the ring in Beatrice's palm, allowing her to complete the exchange. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn leaned down for a kiss that drew approving applause from their friends and neighbors. The celebration continued at the town hall, transformed with decorations and tables laden with food contributed by every family. There was music, dancing, though Flynn could only watch due to his injuries, and endless well wishes from the community that had embraced them both. Late that night, as they walked to the boarding house under a sky brilliant with winter stars, Flynn stopped suddenly. "I have a confession to make," he said, looking somewhat sheepish. "The day we met, when I saw you crying at the station, I almost walked past. Not because I didn't want to help, but because you looked so beautiful even in your distress that I was afraid I'd make a fool of myself." Beatrice laughed softly. "And here I thought you were being heroic." "I became heroic the moment I spoke to you," Flynn replied with a smile. "Because it took all my courage to approach an angel." "An angel abandoned by her fiancé," Beatrice reminded him, shaking her head at the memory. "His loss," Flynn said simply. "My infinite gain." By spring, Flynn's hands had healed completely and work on their house resumed with renewed vigor. Beatrice continued teaching, now as Mrs. Dawson, returning each day to their temporary home at the boarding house. The arrangement was comfortable enough, but both longed for the privacy of their own home. In April, just as wildflowers began carpeting the desert, the house was finally ready for occupancy. It was modest but well built, with 3 bedrooms, "for our future family," Flynn had explained. A spacious kitchen, and Beatrice's favorite feature, a front porch facing west toward magnificent sunsets. Their first night in their new home, Flynn carried Beatrice across the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It's tradition," he insisted, setting her down gently in the front room where a fire already crackled in the hearth. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson." "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the simple furnishings they'd collected, some purchased, others gifted by townspeople, a few crafted by Flynn's own hands. On the mantel sat the books he'd lent her that first day, now permanently part of their home. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Beatrice taught during the day while Flynn worked at Copper Ridge, overseeing the growing operation. Evenings were spent together on their porch or by the fire, talking about their days, reading aloud to each other, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence of 2 people perfectly content in each other's company. Weekends brought work around their property. Flynn had ambitious plans for a vegetable garden, fruit trees, and eventually, some livestock of their own. Beatrice, city-raised but adaptable, embraced these new skills with enthusiasm, learning to preserve food for winter and manage a household with the limited resources available in the territory. In late summer, Beatrice discovered she was expecting their first child. Flynn's reaction was everything she could have hoped for: tears of joy, followed by an almost comical level of protective concern. "You shouldn't be standing so long in the schoolroom," he fretted. "And the walk there and back, perhaps I should take you by wagon." "Flynn Dawson, women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Beatrice reminded him with fond exasperation. "I'm perfectly capable of walking to school and teaching until at least Christmas." The town celebrated the news with typical enthusiasm. Babies were always welcome in frontier communities, especially ones born to such well-respected citizens. Mrs. Henderson immediately began knitting blankets, while other women shared advice and old wives' tales about determining whether the child would be a boy or girl. As Beatrice's condition became more apparent, the school board hired a young woman from Tucson to serve as assistant teacher, with the understanding she would take over completely for several months after the baby's arrival. Flynn, meanwhile, worked longer hours, determined to ensure their financial security before the birth. On a cold February morning in 1887, after a difficult night of labor with the town's midwife and doctor in attendance, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy son. Flynn, who had paced anxiously outside their bedroom door throughout the ordeal, was finally admitted to see his wife and child. "We have a son," Beatrice said tiredly, holding out the swaddled infant. Flynn took the baby with trembling hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "What shall we name him?" "I thought perhaps Thomas, after your father," Beatrice suggested. "Thomas Flynn Dawson. Thomas, Flynn repeated, testing the name as he gazed at his son's tiny features. It suits him. Life with a newborn brought new challenges and joys. Beatrice took a break from teaching, focusing on recovering her strength and caring for little Thomas. Flynn rearranged his work schedule to be home more, often bringing paperwork from the ranch to complete at their kitchen table so he could be near his family. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day. As spring arrived, Beatrice would sit with him on the porch, pointing out birds and flowers, telling him stories about the world he would grow to explore. Flynn often found them there when he returned home, his heart swelling at the sight of the two people he loved most enjoying the home he had built for them. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after putting Thomas to bed, Beatrice turned to Flynn with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day at the train station?" she asked. Flynn smiled. "I believe I promised to meet you on every train after." "Yes," Beatrice nodded. "It seemed such a strange thing to say at the time, but it gave me hope when I desperately needed it." "I meant it," Flynn replied, taking her hand. "I think some part of me knew even then that you were meant to be in my life. When I left Pennsylvania, I thought I was traveling toward a specific future with Harold," Beatrice mused. "Instead, I was really traveling toward you. Toward this life we've built. It's far better than anything I imagined." Flynn kissed her hand. Sometimes the best journeys take unexpected turns. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, their family life expanded to include more community involvement. Beatrice returned to teaching part-time, bringing Thomas with her to the schoolroom where older students delighted in entertaining him during breaks. Flynn's position at Copper Ridge grew more secure, with the possibility of purchasing the operation outright when the aging owner decided to retire. In the fall of 1889, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Emma Rose. Thomas, now a sturdy 2-year-old with his father's serious expression and his mother's curious nature, approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, frequently checking on his baby and bringing toys for her enjoyment. Oro Blanco itself was growing too. The railroad had extended a spur line directly to town, bringing more settlers, businesses, and opportunities. The school now employed 3 teachers for nearly 60 students, with Beatrice serving as headmistress. Flynn had completed the purchase of Copper Ridge, renaming it Dawson Ranch and expanding operations to include not just cattle, but also horses bred specifically for the cavalry. One spring morning in 1890, almost 5 years after their first meeting, Flynn surprised Beatrice by announcing he needed her help at the train station. "What sort of help?" she asked, curious. "A special delivery is arriving on the noon train," he explained cryptically. "Something for our anniversary." Intrigued, Beatrice arranged for Mrs. Henderson to watch the children and accompanied Flynn to the station. As the train pulled in, billowing steam into the clear Arizona sky, Beatrice was struck by memories of that fateful day when she had stood alone and abandoned on this very platform. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, noting her expression. "About how differently things turned out than I expected," she replied. "How what seemed like tragedy became the greatest blessing of my life." Flynn squeezed her hand as passengers began disembarking from the train. He scanned the crowd with anticipation, finally waving at an older couple making their way carefully down the steps. "Beatrice," Flynn said, "I'd like you to meet my Aunt Martha and Uncle Joseph from Texas. I wrote them last year, and we've been corresponding since. They're my only remaining family, and they've come to meet you and the children." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes as the elderly couple approached. Martha, a smaller feminine version of Flynn with the same kind eyes, immediately embraced Beatrice. "My dear, we've waited so long to meet the woman who brought our Flynn back to life," she said warmly. "Your letters have told us so much, but seeing you in person, you're exactly as he described, just beautiful." "You've been writing about me?" Beatrice asked Flynn, surprised. "For years," he admitted. "Since that first day, I wrote them about the schoolteacher I met at the train station, about how you changed everything." Uncle Joseph, a tall man with a weathered face and gentle manner, shook Beatrice's hand firmly. "This boy was like a son to us before his parents passed. Losing Sarah nearly broke him. When he wrote about you, we knew he'd found his way back." The visit was a joyous one. Martha and Joseph stayed for a month, integrating seamlessly into their family life. Thomas and Emma adored their new great-aunt and uncle, while Beatrice treasured the stories they shared about Flynn's childhood and parents. Martha, observing Beatrice and Flynn together, remarked one evening, "In all my years, I've rarely seen two people so perfectly matched. You complement each other, his steadiness balances your spirit, while your vision gives his practicality purpose." "I got lucky," Beatrice replied simply. "Being left at that station was the best thing that ever happened to me." After their relatives departed, promising to return the following year, life resumed its pleasant rhythm. Years passed, marked by the growth of their children, the expansion of the ranch, and the development of Oro Blanco into a prosperous town. They added another son, James, in 1892, completing their family through good times and challenges, drought years that threatened the ranch, illness that swept through the town claiming several lives. The normal struggles of family life, their partnership remained unshakable. Each supported the other's dreams, celebrated successes, and provided comfort in difficult moments. On their 10th anniversary, Flynn surprised Beatrice with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation away from the children, who stayed with trusted friends. For 2 weeks, they explored the city, attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, and rediscovered each other away from daily responsibilities. On their final evening, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, Beatrice turned to her husband. "I've been thinking about what you said that first day, about meeting me on every train after." Flynn smiled. "I've kept that promise, haven't I?" "You have," she agreed. "But I realized something recently. You weren't just talking about actual trains. You were promising to be there for every journey, every new beginning, every adventure life might bring." "That's a poetic interpretation," Flynn said, pulling her close. "But yes, that's exactly what I meant to promise, and what I still promise today." "Then I make the same vow to you," Beatrice replied, "for all our journeys ahead." When they returned to Oro Blanco, they found the town buzzing with news of Arizona's likely advancement to statehood. The territory was growing, changing, moving into a new century with new possibilities. Their children were growing too, Thomas showing his father's aptitude for ranching, Emma demonstrating her mother's love of learning, little James revealing an unexpected talent for music. As the years passed, Beatrice sometimes marveled at how differently her life had unfolded from what she had planned that day. She boarded a train east with dreams of marrying a man she knew only through letters. Instead, she had found Flynn's steady, honorable Flynn, who had kept every promise he ever made to her. On a warm evening in 1910, 25 years after their first meeting, Beatrice and Flynn sat on the porch of their home, now expanded to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. Thomas, married with 2 children of his own, ran the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Emma was away at college in California, preparing to become a doctor. James, their youngest, was upstairs practicing the piano. "You ever wonder what happened to Harold?" Flynn asked suddenly, surprising Beatrice with the mention of a name rarely spoken between them. she considered the question. Occasionally, not with regret but curiosity. I heard years ago that he ended up in San Francisco working in a bank. Do you ever wish things had gone according to your original plan? Flynn pressed. Beatrice turned to him, taking in the face she had loved for a quarter-century, still handsome despite the silver at his temples and lines etched by sun and laughter. Not for a single moment, she said truthfully. What seemed like abandonment was actually deliverance. He left me at the station so I could find you. Flynn leaned over to kiss her, the gesture as tender as it had been in their youth. Then I'm grateful to him, in a strange way. His selfishness led me to the greatest happiness of my life. As twilight deepened around them, Beatrice rested her head on Flynn's shoulder, listening to the familiar sounds of their home James's music, the distant lowing of cattle, the whistle of the evening train pulling into Oro Blanco station. That train no longer brought anxiety or memories of abandonment. Instead, it was simply part of the backdrop of the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a chance meeting and a promise kept. I love you, Flynn Dawson, Beatrice said softly. And I love you, Beatrice Dawson, he replied. Today, tomorrow, and on every journey yet to come. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their shared life, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are found only when original plans fall apart. Her intended groom had left her at the station, but in doing so, had unwittingly given her the greatest gift, the chance to find true love with a man who would never leave her waiting. A man who had promised to meet her on every train after, and had kept that promise in ways more profound than either could have imagined that fateful day in 1885.